Today I'm going to talk about a poem called Meipi, or perhaps Meipi. This is one of these pesky characters that I never really know how to pronounce. I am ashamed to say. It seems to have several authoritative pronunciations. According to my go-to dictionary that I use all the time, the proper pronunciation in this case for the signification should actually be Meipi. But I also know that there's perhaps the most common pronunciation today, P or P. For example, the street in Shanghai, since I lived in Shanghai for many years, Huangpi Lu. Well, whatever it may be, I think in the signification of a pond or a lake, it should actually be Bei. So, Mei Bei Xing or Mei Pi Xing. That's it about the title. The reason I choose to talk about this poem is because it's quite atypical for a poem by Du Fu. What do I mean by that? Let's see if I can explain it. Not much actually happens in this poem. He is with some friends on a boat, basically. But linguistically and syntactically and metaphorically and linguistically, there's a lot of things going on. So, as you may be aware, you know there is this thing in literary history, this phenomenon in literary history called mannerism. Mannerism basically means that you choose a complicated way to say something simple. Classical style, on the other hand, usually takes great pride in expressing even difficult concepts or original thoughts in simple and direct language. And Du Fu in general is more of a classical poet than a mannered poet, but this is a rare case where he really showcases his mannerism. Now, mannerism is not a school. It's not really properly a style either. It's sort of a phenomenon. The phenomenon of making language at the forefront of poetry and not sort of so much the substance. The more I age, actually, I must say, I become more and more skeptical and less patient with mannerism as such. But to the extent that poetry is the mere art of stringing together pleasing sounding words, there is, and I think will always be, a place for mannered poetry in the world of poetry. So this is an example of that, and that's really why I choose to include this poem. So what is this poem about? You know, the thing that happens in this poem is basically just they're on a boat, the wind starts blowing, then the wind stops blowing, and then the moon comes out. So that's basically all you need to know. And it's believed to have been composed in 754. This Meipi or Meipi or whatever, it's a lake in the vicinity of Chang'an. And in this poem, he's together with Tenshen, which is a name that has cropped up before in this series. And Tenshen was, as many of you are probably aware, a famous poet of the Tang Dynasty in his own right. And he was a friend of Du Fu. He was an altogether more successful character than Du Fu. He succeeded in the imperial examinations, which Du Fu never did, and he had a military career at first, and then he had various high civilian posts. It says in the first line, 陈生兄弟. So he's with more than at least one of Tenshen's many brothers. Tenshen had many brothers. There is this linguistic phenomenon of people in the Tang Dynasty and people in ancient China being referred to by the number in among the siblings. And Tenshen, he was 27, so he was number 27 among his brothers. I think we may reach the the conclusion that all of these 27 brothers were not born by one woman, by one mother. Anyway, let's look at this poem and the text of it, one line by line, as I usually do. Oh, I do four lines in a row for this poet. 岑参兄弟皆好奇，携我远来有美皮。Oh, here we have it. Probably, in the Tang Dynasty, this was probably an E rhyme. That's why he says Meipi, and we still have this pronunciation in modern Chinese as well. So Meipi, yes, why not? So Mei or Meipi, 携我远来有美皮 for the sake of the rhyme. That's it. 天地炎惨忽异色，波涛万顷堆流里。See, sometimes this is the first time I read this poem aloud. If I had done it before, when reading, I would probably have understood intuitively why he wants the P there and not the Bei. Smart, Stephen Owen. So let's look at that. As I said, Chen Shen Xiongdi, it's Chen Shen and his brothers. They both love marvels, he said. Hao qi. Of course, 好奇 nowadays it's sort of hardened into a fixed word. It just means curious, someone who is curious. But we have to read it here as two words. Loves marvels, or loves qi. Qi, basically, this is really probably the reason for Du Fu taking such a mannered approach to his poetry in this very poem, because he's together with brothers then who, in his estimation, are men very interested in special and unusual things. And actually, to posterity, this qi is also a characteristic of Chen Shen's poetry. So Chen Shen, he is said to have been a qi person and written qi poetry. Qi is highly positive in classical Chinese. When it's used of a piece of writing or a talent or a person or anything like that, it's a highly positive word. It means unusual in a good way. Though we have the word qi guai nowadays, which is probably the most common word that this character occurs in modern times. Qi guai basically means strange, and it's not exactly positive if you say that someone is qi guai. But this is a highly positive word, qi, and hao qi, always on the lookout for something unusual and interesting. So he's going to describe an experience that we may or may not think of as unusual, but at least he will try to take on the challenge of being more qi, more marvelous, more extravagant in his poetry, at least, than all the 27 brothers of Chen Shen could be together. Okay, so that's basically it. That's how I understand this. And they are basically on a boat, taking here afar, probably a day or two away from Chang'an, to visit the Lake Meipi. Okay, so they're going on a boat. 天地炎惨忽异色. 炎惨, of course, a very unusual word. 炎惨 just means dark blue or blue-black sort of. So 炎惨is the look on the heavens as they darken for dusk, because we realize soon the moon will come up. So they're setting out on the lake as it's sort of getting dark. This 残 is funny, right? Because it usually means you have it in 残忍 and so forth, cruel, right? So 炎残, it sounds very gloomy and somber, as it says here. But this 残 is also occasionally used to mean dark. Actually, there are other compounds where this occurs as that, like that. 忽异色 suddenly changes color. That is, they become 炎残. 天地 change color and become 炎残. 波涛万顷, 10,000 acres of rippling waves. 堆流里, so 堆流里, this describes the movement of the waves. 堆, basically, in the shape of little hills or protrusions. Lapis lazuli in the translation here is probably incorrect. Technically speaking, for liuli, I think liuli, I don't know exactly how to translate it, but it's suitable here as it describes water. So liuli is some kind of stone, at least it's some kind of perhaps semi-precious stone used for decoration. There's liuli chang in Beijing and so forth. Lapis lazuli. 琉璃汉满泛舟入，世书信集忧思集。驼作鲸吞不复之，恶风白浪何嗟及。Okay, so here he really starts getting on with all the words, just piling words and words and words on, lots of adjectives and stuff. This is really not Du Fu's ordinary style, though there are many styles of Chinese poetry that really makes extensive use of this kind of poetic technique. We have the 楚辞, is probably sort of the fountainhead of this type of poetry, which is altogether quite cosmic and mysterious, and it takes its roots in, I think, religious ceremonies, perhaps psychedelic experiences of meeting with gods and so on. And it's the experience of reading truths really is sort of a shamanic experience, and that's where the Fu poetry, the rhapsody genre, really grows out of 楚辞. This sort of intoxication with words and experiences and feelings and colors and the look of things per se, and the great variety of the universe and the things and organisms that exist in it. That's sort of really what motivates that kind of poetry. And we have the whole food genre, which is always like this, with many adjectives. And here Du Fu is sort of emulating a little bit of that in his poetry here. So we have all these 流里汉慢 the 驼作鲸吞恶风白浪. It's like, okay, what are you actually talking about? Let's look at this. 汉慢, and there's also 慢汉. Both of these occur. I think in my own edition, it says 慢汉. Here, 汉慢 is more normal. And this isn't just an adjective stretched endlessly. Yes, it refers to the sort of sea-like expanses, volumes of water. And this is what they enter with their little boat into. 世书信集. Okay, so the experience, the thing, the 是 is strange, unusual, and the 信, their sort of mood for these things. There was 信. This played a very eminent and important role in the series of 10 poems that I did a long video on. 信, this sort of feeling of being in a poetic and elated mood because of being in highly poetic circumstances with good friends and drinking and so on. 信 reaches its peak. So what's really happening? It's getting dark. So this is very unusual. No one has ever seen anything like that before. And of course, his anxious thoughts gather. Why? Well, no one really knows. And then we have a quite mysterious couplet, actually syntactically at least. And I think we may have a mistranslation here, but let's look at it here. So, 驼作鲸吞, the alligator rising, the boat swallowing. The boat swallowing. Incredible. 鲸吞. He just writes a boat swallowing here, the translator. I didn't notice that before. That's really funny. So 驼, this is the alligator, it's the Yangtze alligator. This is one of these sad creatures or saddening animals that hardly exist anymore, unfortunately, because of pollution and ecological damage and so forth. It used to be ubiquitous, not in just the Yangtze River, but also, basically in all of the Chinese larger rivers. The Yangtze alligator, 驼, a very complicated character, at least, of course. So points for you if you remember how to write this one. And 驼作鲸吞, the alligator rises. Yes, this 作, corresponds to something like qi, rises, yes. And the whale swallows. I think we can rule out the possibility that there are actually whales in this little pond that they're on. So this is an hyperbole and metaphor. For what? Well, the wind. The wind has started blowing, so it feels like they're like in a storm on an ocean. He's really piling it on here. And then 不复之what? We no longer know this? Well, that's Owen's interpretation. I think probably this refers back to this, the expanse of water that looks like, a tiling of lapis lazuli or something like that. Suddenly that is known no more, because 恶风白浪, with the horrible wind and the white waves, these cannot be reached anymore. And then we have here a funny little sort of interjection, 和阶级, which just means 阶和级, 和级 cannot be reached, and this is just a sigh, a sound. It's just a sound of the sound of a sigh, and this sounds also a little bit sort of quite mannered, I would say. And this 和阶级 is also occurs in the 诗经, so it's taken right out of them. 和阶级 is 阶和级, it's the same thing. 主人锦帆香未开，舟子喜胜无分哀。夫衣散乱照偶发，丝管周啾空翠来。Well, as a mass of extravagant words, it's still quite attractive, I must say. So what's happening, they're just basically they're forging ahead on the water, and the host, the 主人, that's Mr. Tsang and his brothers, they are opening the brocade sails, for him, 香未开, usually probably for him, and the 舟子, that's what would in modern Chinese be the 船夫, boatman. They're happy as hell. Why? Well, there's no dust in the air, the wind has started blowing, and they're happy. So Du Fu is a bit worried about all his imaginary whales and crocodiles and everything. But other people on the boat, they're happy, because they're not having this psychic experience that Du Fu is having. That's putting him in this trance-like situation where he sees things and he becomes a rhapsodist of old. Well, sort of, I'm exaggerating here, but this is sort of really the feeling that I'm getting. He's not really worried about in this poem, Du Fu, of really relating his words to something real. The connection between what he's seeing and what he's saying is here. It's quite far. It's quite loose, I would say. Let's look at the words instead. Fu, yes, indeed, it's a duck, a wild duck. This yi, it's gulls, yes. Usually it's called o, right? Hai o, the gulls, and it's, yes, yi, when you look it up in the dictionary, it's said to be simply another name for gull. They scatter as the 照偶, the rowing chant begins. It's a boating song, basically. And the music chirps, 啾啾, which is sort of really, this is the sound of birds chirping, 啾啾, which you can almost sound it. And here it describes the instruments, that is 丝管. 丝管is a conventional coupling that just means instruments in general, instruments that of silk and instruments of pipe. So we have basically two classes of instruments, strings and winds, basically, we would say in Western terminology. They come through the azure mist, he says here. 空翠来. Or, I read it almost as if, in the chirping of the instruments, suddenly the empty azure, 空翠, comes. I think that is the correct interpretation here, because otherwise, the parallelism here would be faulty. This is 夫衣丝管散乱周究. That's a good parallel. And here we have 赵偶, a noun phrase, and 空翠 should also be a noun phrase, which verbs in the last word here. So 发 or 来. I think 空翠 is the subject of this sentence, not through the azure mist. The azure, the empty azure, 空翠 comes. Anyway, that just means the weather turns better. It started off with a little bit of 炎残, that is darkness and overcast probably, and it started blowing and everything, but the wind started blowing. But now the empty azure comes back.晨干絮漫深莫测，林叶荷花静如是。晚在中流薄屑轻，夏归无解终南黑。Again, seen as pure word music, is very, very beautiful, so I won't take that away from Du Fu. What is he actually talking about? Well, who knows? My commentary very intelligently says that if there is water nut, 林叶, ling, and 荷花, lotus blossoms, then reasonably speaking, the water here cannot be very deep. And here, Du Fu says, 深莫测, depths have never been fathomed. It's never been measured. It's immeasurably deep lotus pond. Well, I guess Du Fu wasn't much of a naturalist. I don't really get the image here, I must say. 晨干絮漫, sinking a pole and thereby lengthening sort of a root or something. What is that supposed to convey? It sounds pretty dumb, to be honest. Stephen Owen, he makes some kind of by depth pole or measuring line, sort of. The man would be measuring line then, and the pole would be the sort of thing that you stick in the water to see how deep it is. And they cannot measure the pond, so the pond has to be immeasurably deep. Well, let's not get stuck on this. 林叶荷花, so 林叶荷花, yes, it's water chestnut and lotus, of course. They are 静. Here it says, this is actually 安静 the 静, right? It's quiet. It's quiet, it's not clean. But there is another reading of this poem, actually, I think, which is the one that Owen uses, where you have 干净 the 静 here instead. These two characters sound the same, and the one means clean and the other means quiet, and here it says quiet, and it makes more sense. Of course, the flowers are quiet, and they're clean as if scrubbed. That's a very nice image, isn't it? Right, 静如是, but it's also conventional, so heck. 晚在中流, sorry. 晚在中流薄屑轻. 晚, this actually means as if. But Du Fu is clearly thinking of the poem in the Shi Jing, actually, here, where it says 晚在中央 and so on, 晚在 blah blah blah. So we're right in mid-water, right in the middle of the water. 晚在中流薄屑轻. What does 薄屑 mean then? 薄屑 is actually the ancient name for the Bohai Gulf. That is the northernmost part of the Chinese territorial waters, basically. And, well, that part of the Chinese Sea is not particularly clear now, if there are any such. Here is just a metaphor, obviously, for vast expanses of water. And because he's using such hyperbolic language, no one knows if they're in a small pond or if it's actually a large body of water. But let's imagine that it's semi-large. But the Gulf of Bo, well, the Bohai, it's not as large as that. 宛在中流渤海，薄蟹青，下贵无极，中南黑。Well, this is actually a kind of a nice image. Let's look at the translation. It should be reasonably easy to see what it means. Receding downward endlessly is the blackness of Mount Zhongnan. So Zhongnan Shan, the Zhongnan Mountains, Zhongnan Hei, the blackness of Mount Zhongnan, Zhongnan Hei. These mountains, which is sort of a little mountain range to the south of Chang'an, and they are basically in the middle of these mountains now, I think. So they're actually visible, and they're visible in the lake, in the mirror image of the lake. So the mirror image of the Zhongnan Mountains, they recede downwards, 下归无极, into endlessness. That's a nice image, isn't it? 下归无极，中南黑. The mountains go dark when they recede down. They recede downwards into endlessness, something like that. That's a very nice line, and it actually describes probably something that he actually sees. So very nice. Let's go on. 半杯批. Well, your choice. 半杯以南。纯净山，洞影袅迢，冲绒间，船舷明甲，云际寺，水面月出蓝田关。Exactly as in the last line, he's talking about, it sounds like the half of the mountain is soaking the mountain. Well, sorry, half of the lake is soaking the mountain. Well, soaking the mountain, only the mountain, the image of the mountain in the lake, then obviously. So he's building onto the image that he created in the last line, and its shadow moves, or its mirror image moves. 动影, this moving image, is 袅迢, in the 冲绒. Okay, so more of these just two-syllable vocables. This 袅迢is a shimmer, quivering, swaying, I think is more like it. And 冲绒doesn't really mean sloshing, I would say. I think 融, which means by itself, can mean to melt. Probably that's why Owen translates sloshing. But I think 冲融is really referring to the depth of the lake, in the sense that immensities where nothing is really clearly demarcated. In the 冲绒间, in the 冲绒, in this immensity, the image of the mountain moves quiveringly or swayingly, something like that. This is the same character as 船. It's just a variety character, 一体字. So I had to look this up, and then I realized that it was just 船. Funny, right? 船舷 is the side of a boat. So 船舷. That, well, 明甲云际寺. So 云际寺, 云际山, there is a mountain here, which should be seen actually from the lake. Otherwise, this makes no sense. So 云际山 is a mountain with a temple on it. Here called simply the Yunji temple, but according to my source, at least, there is not a temple called, or there weren't a temple called Yunji Si, but there was a mountain called Yunji Shan with a temple on it. And he keeps on with this image, which is kind of cool, actually. The mount, he's actually, they're going on the lake, obviously, in their boat, but since they have the mirror image of the mountain here, it's as if they move towards the temple on the mountain. Here it says, in the darkness, Ming is more like in the setting sun, I think. So probably the setting sun is coming out now, and they're bumping, knocking something like, yes, there is this sense of this word, but this character is mostly onomatopoeic. It's the sound of friction. So it's as if they come here on the surface of the lake and they bump into the mirror image of the temple, which is it's a really wonderful image, I must say. And now the sun has set. Then on the surface of the water, the moon rises over the 蓝田关. 蓝田关, the indigo fields pass. Yes, it's the pass in the same region. The point is obviously that both of this in the same way as this temple, this pass would be seen in the lake, and they're sort of looking down on everything, but what they're looking down on actually exists above them. So this is an interesting image that Hidufu creates here. And very qi, right? Very marvelous. Exactly in the taste of the 10 brothers. So they're having a jolly good time. What happens then? Well, no one knows. Please explain to me what happens here. 此时离龙一土珠，平以击鼓群龙驱。香妃汉女出歌舞，金枝翠旗光有无. I think Dufu is reaching, his shamanistic ecstasy at this point. So he sees all these mythological beings and dragons and gods and ethereal banners of cohorts of divine ladies. And what does this mean? Is this a metaphor for anything? Well, who knows? Let's look at the words first. Li Long. Li means all black. On horses, then obviously, and the Li Long, this black dragon, is primarily famous actually from a quite tantalizing passage in the Zhuangzi, where it says that the most precious pearl is in the deepest abyss under the jaw of the black dragon, Li Long. And this Li Long is spitting forth its pearl at this point. So this is that's an image, obviously, of a treasure, a secret treasure guarded by a dangerous being, and this dangerous being it's revealing its secrets. Or maybe, it's just an image of the moon coming up. Who knows? Because what could it be referring to? We don't know, because Dufu is in this rhapsodist mood and he doesn't really care about if what he's writing makes sense or not. 平夷击鼓群龙驱. Pingyi is also a god. It's a water god. I think actually he's the god of Huanghe, the Yellow River. God knows where this comes from originally. It's interesting to think that there has to be a god of the Huanghe who invented him, who found out about him, who worshipped him first. I would really like to know that. Anyway, here he is beating the drum, and there's lots of dragons that are sort of scurrying around. And so, but not apart from the black dragons, the pearl of the black dragon, and the god of the Huanghe, we also have other river gods and goddesses. We have the Xiangfei, the river Xiang in modern Hunan. The Xiangfei are the daughters of the ancient emperor Shun, who famously died on a tour to the south, on an expedition to the south, and there his daughters became goddesses of the Xiang River. And the Hanyu, they are goddesses or some kind of spirits of the Han River. And they occur in poetry, where they are sort of elusive and alluring beings. So they are all of these goddesses. They come out and they dance and sing. So here you also have to ask yourself, are they just sort of passing by another boat where perhaps there are some drummers and a bunch of girls singing, and Dufu is just in this shamanistic ecstasy, and he's interpreting everything he sees as gods and goddesses, and the moon in the sky, the pearl of the black dragon. I don't know. You have to guess. And it's sort of 金枝翠旗. What is this? The golden branches and kingfisher banners. Does this happen before his eyes, or does it happen in his imagination? Guang you wu, he sort of doesn't really care. I mean, guang here, you should have a verb perhaps in this position for it to make more sense syntactically, but he has just put in guang as a light, as a noun here, and it's sort of you. It's there, not there. The light of these banners and branches. So, what is this? Is it just merely epithets? Is he metaphorically talking about something that happens, or is he impressed by the forces of nature? Is it so beautiful that he's losing his mind? What happens? Is he just trying to impress on the 10 brothers? Who knows, And Doof is not telling us. 咫尺但愁雷雨至，苍茫不晓神灵意。少壮几时耐老何？向来哀乐何其多。咫尺苍茫. 咫尺 is the very close, things that are very close. 苍茫 are the very great things. 咫尺, this is actually funny. I had to look this up before I did this video. 咫尺 or 咫尺, this occurs all the time, of course, as an expression of closeness. We have the 成语近在咫尺, close as a foot. Basically, a 尺 is today translated as a foot. Actually, 尺 doesn't mean a foot to begin with. Originally, it means the span of the hand, and 尺 is said to have been the span of a man's hand, and the 指 to have been the span of a woman's hand. It's interesting, right? But of course, here it means very close. In the closeness, I'm just worried if there will be thunderstorms. Why are you worried about that? Because everything's changing so fast? Or I don't know. He's just seeing things. In the vastness, I don't understand the meaning of the divine force. The meaning of all that's happening, the wind blowing, the wind stopping, there being a lake, me being Dufu, Tenshin and his brothers loving marvels, the goddesses existing in my mind or in the outer world. I don't understand. He doesn't understand anything, and we don't understand anything either. 少壮几时耐老何，向来哀乐何其多. This is a somewhat conventional ending, isn't it? How much longer will I be young? What can I do about being old? Oh, there is so much happiness, there's so much pain. Why is there so much of everything? Very conventional, isn't it? Especially with the background of everything else. And I must say, this is a problem that Dufu really doesn't correct until later in his career. He has an ending problem. Let's say that. He has an ending problem. That's all of the poem. That's all of the poem. And as you can probably tell from this little discussion, I'm not particularly a fan of this kind of manneristic poetry and sort of not just delighting in vocabulary for vocabulary's sake and word music for the sake of word music. But there is a place for this kind of thing as well. But if Dufu was primarily a poet like this, I would probably not be doing a whole series about him. Anyway, this is one of the highlights, perhaps, depending on your inclination, of Dufu's early years. So I think in any case, it's fair to include it as an example of the great breadth, if nothing else, of the moods and styles that he was capable of. So thank you for listening to this time, and keep on reading. Bye-bye.